So, a dear friend wanted to see how I quilt on a frame with as many needles as I do, because most folks only do one needle. I tend to do several, and that's because it's how I was taught. My aunt quilts the entire frame, and she has needles all up and down, and depending on where she wants to go during the day, she can start in the center, she can start off center, she can basically start anywhere on the row that she wants. This is a Lemoyne Star quilt that I'm working on for a fundraiser for the Octagon House. It'll be available for raffle, hopefully later this year. It depends on how much I can get quilted. Uh, and if you're in Minnesota and hand quilt, you're always welcome to come over and put some stitches in because the more the merrier. And so I'm going to go through a couple of things about my quilting style and how I do my thing. So first, you'll see in my hand, I have a pair of needle nose pliers. This was another thing that my grandfather did for my grandmother and passed it down to the rest of the family who quilts. My aunt uses this or hemostats. I don't like the hemostats because I bend needles too easy. This allows me a little bit more sensitivity to my needles and to pull through. But because if you notice, I put several stitches on a needle at a time, if I were to try to pull that out with just my fingers, it would be impossible, and it would take forever to finish a quilt. I know some people do still stab stitch, and bless their hearts for it. Um, I do not. I pull through, and I use a running stitch, and it turns out beautifully for me. I've practiced a lot, and as you can see, I can do about 8 to 10 stitches per inch here. So, a couple of other things that I do that's different than other people. I use rulers, I use vinyl templates that I make, and I use a pencil. These are very simple pencils. I use them to mark my quilt because a couple of washings and pencil stains go away. A lot of the other stuff, washable markers, pounce, those kinds of, well, pounce is pretty good and chalk, but you could also mess it up and run it away. Uh, the friction markers I've heard have come back. Washable markers I haven't really tested to see if they're valid and work. And good old trusty number two worked for my ancestors. It works for me. So it's what I go with. I have a box of these little golf pencils that I bought for a pincushion exchange that I did because I was going to make all these pincushions and never did. I made one, two, uh, and now I have all of these and they're great for marking this stuff. Again, simple dollar store ruler or free ruler that you can get at the fair are really the best for marking straight lines, in my opinion. And as you can see, there's a lot of straight lines in these star quilt pieces because I'm doing a shadow stitch. So basically what I've done is I've taken the template that's here for the actual pieced star, and I've done it here, but I'm adding in extra lines to increase the quilting. So anyway, talking about my quilting, I have 7 needles going right now. That's kind of my average. I can go between 7 and 10, depending on how busy I feel like working. Um, and I tend to work clockwise. It really doesn't matter as long as I know that I'm hitting every one of my needles. So the first thing I do is pull through just like that. And of course I have my thimble. I use the flat top thimble because it allows me to have a ledge to leverage the back of the needle off of when I'm doing this running stitch. So again, I'm just going to go down here. I'm just checking to where this is going to even out. All right, so I'm looking. Sometimes I'll do this. I'll run my needle or I'll run my thread straight down so I can find my point, because sometimes these straight points don't always go where I want them to. So using the thread allows me to kind of visualize where I want my needle to go. And then what I do is I just push down till it barely touches the finger underneath, and then I push it back up with that finger. And I just keep doing that. And of course, this is a running stitch. For those who are curious, I use John James needles. I use John James 8 betweens, and I tend to buy them in bulk because I bend them a lot. So I buy, and of course, I'm doing this counterclockwise because I'm documenting it, but whatever. I buy in packs of 1,000 because needles bend and break, especially when you're putting this many stitches on. Some people would be like, oh, put less stitches. I'm like, yeah, it's not how I roll. Um, so I just a whole bunch of buy a whole bunch of needles. Now, sometimes you can't put a lot of stitches on because the batting is sticky or the fabric is sticky if it's a humid day. This time of year here in Minnesota, today it's currently -7, and I've got the fireplace going in the background. So there's very little humidity in the house. So the fabric is really dry and easy to work. But something about this section of batting is being difficult. So that's why I'm only doing a few stitches at a time in some spaces. And I apologize for hitting the camera stand as we do this because it is right by my elbow. So again, I'm just going to pull through and I'm just working my line. I know lots of folks work on hoops instead of frames. I used a hoop for a quilt I did for the American Quilt Study Group last year, and I loved it because I could adjust the frame. And I use a Harry Barnett frame. So for those of you who know that name, he's in New Hampshire and he makes amazing frames with bases that you can angle and you can turn 360 degrees. It's really, really cool because then you don't have to um, reposition like you do on a frame. Frames, you can really only work in one direction. I know some people, like you can kind of see over here, this was actually done on a back end. So it looks like somebody was working this way. And according to my aunt, my great grandmother, one of my great grandmothers could quilt backwards away from herself. I'm not that person. I can quilt right to left, and I can quilt back to forward, or back from the back to me. Um, and I can quilt at diagonals. And of course, if I'm trying to go for this angle, I'd have to like really wedge around. So I'm not going to work on that one right now because it would knock the camera, which we've already talked about having camera movement today. Um, Other things, I'm I'm very basic. I use quilts and cotton. I do use 100% cotton thread. I know some folks put wax on it to help it move through. I do not. Everybody has their techniques that work for them, and I encourage you to find what works for you and do it because what I do may not work for everybody. It works for me because it's what I was taught. And apparently my genetic makeup makes it possible for me to still be an amazing quilter in as the fifth generation of my family. So, um, but that's it basically. Is I just work my way around. I and then when I get to an end of the row, I bury my ends in. I actually bury my ends in the seams if I can, so you can't see the end. And I just take a couple of back stitches. I don't knot at the end. And when I start, I pull the knot through underneath or through the first layer, not through all three layers. I know some folks are like, "Oh, knotting's bad," but I knot. I want to make sure that it's going to stick around. And hopefully this quilt will be an heirloom piece for whoever wins it. And if not, it gives somebody some love. And who knows, maybe 100 years from now, somebody will be documenting this quilt. So, um, feel free to put questions in the chat um, and enjoy and continue stitching. Thanks.